Alex Cooper, welcome to the Drum Syndicate podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And I'm very interested to be involved.
Awesome. Well, I'm Bill. This is Marcos. Of course, you've known Marcos for quite a while.
Yeah,
How
I've known Marcus for a few years.
I'll just briefly explain how we know each other. I grew up in England. Along with my older brother, we were members of the church choir, and my mother was the director. A girl named Katrina, her family moved to the area, and she wanted to become part of the choir, and she did. And my brother realized that she was a really good singer and thought, let's put something together. So we put together a cover band with a couple of other guys, and we were playing what's now considered classic rock, 70s rock. And I left England as soon as I graduated high school, and Vince and Katrina wanted to keep playing music. And anyway, you guys met that way, and Katrina and Alex had a phone call, and Katrina said, yeah, some guy answered the phone who sounded like Shakespeare. I don't know if it's possible to have ever heard Shakespeare speak.
I played briefly in a band with a guitarist who turned out to be a member of the American Navy, and he was living close to where Katrina was. And he had seen Katrina and the rest of you perform. And I just said to her, well, have you come across a singer? And he said, well, yeah, there's this girl, Katrina. And he very kindly got hold of her number, and I called Katrina, and I said, well, do you fancy getting together? And she said, can I bring my friend? And I thought, oh dear, what's this going to be? And actually it was your brother, who's the best bass player I've ever played with. So, that was a great meeting between the three of us. And
Yeah.
many years later, it's almost an exact 40th anniversary of filming the video of Walking on Sunshine. We did it in February. I think possibly a bit earlier in the month, but yeah.
Bill was asking if that video was shot before the song was released.
No, it was. It was shot in, let me think, it was in this sort of old, it was by the Tower of London, where it was all ruins and, very undeveloped. It's now unrecognizable. And the single was released in the States first because we had signed to Capitol Records in Los Angeles. And I mean, like every band, there's a long history, but everybody who has a hobby has a fantasy that maybe they can make a living out of it. And we were blessed. I mean, that's what we all had hobbies, and eventually we made a living out of it. So, and I think one is, truly privileged and blessed to be in that position. And it's not to do with, I mean, there's a small amount of talent involved, but really the reason I think most people get there is just sheer obstinacy. I think you just don't take no for an answer, don't give up. Because, we all know that there are incredible drummers and guitarists and singers and what have you out there. Absolutely amazing. But, somehow it doesn't work out.
Marcos was saying when you guys shot the Walking on Sunshine video, it was you that fell into the mud. Is that correct?
It was, yeah, yeah. It was the coldest day of the year, as it turned out. It was minus, I don't know what. And of course, we were shooting outside. And I actually slipped over and fell in the mud, which was horrible. And then the director said, "Oh, that looked good. Do it again." So I had to do it several times. Torture. We always made videos under uncomfortable situations, but because a little bit later on that year, we made a video in Venice Beach in the summer, and we froze to death because of the wind.
Oh, that was Red Wine and Whiskey. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, recommend whiskey and Do You Want Crying and things. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it looks so nice and sunny.
Yeah, I looked at it. Yeah, I mean, it was freezing. You know what Los Angeles with Venice Beach can be in the middle of the summer if there's a wind wrong direction. It's cold.
Yeah, and I believe we were watching Love Shine a Light today, and it looked like everyone was cold on that one too because the wind was.
Really freezing. That was halfway up a little hill just outside London, and it was that would have been about April when we did it. It was just a freezing cold day. Yeah, we all Augurs well if it's a really cold video, I think.
Okay, so since we're talking about uncomfortable video shoots, that's the way. I noticed that Kimberly, he's playing his SG for the beginning of the video, but then when the water starts coming down, he's playing probably a piece of crap guitar that he doesn't care about. But that drum kit, was that your Ludwig drum kit?
I cannot even remember that video at all. It definitely was not my drum kit. I never performed live with the band with a Ludwig drum kit. I can't remember what drum kits I had. I made a drum kit. And when we did our first tour in the States with Don Henley, I was using that drum kit. That was a mistake because it started falling apart. I just bought shells from a shop in London. I bought some shells and I painted them and got the fittings and I mean, it was no great act of skill at all. It was just necessity. I couldn't afford another set of drums, and I wanted something smaller. So I had small sizes, and yes, I did that. And then eventually, I did what every drummer did in those days. That people would come along and say, "Well, could you use our drum kit?" Or so I eventually went for Sonor drums and German drums. I can't remember why, to be honest. It doesn't really bother me what drums I'm using. And I ended up eventually, there was a guy called Gary Noonan, who's still working in England, who was making lots of drums for all the big drum stars and including American ones. And so I was introduced by a mutual friend, a guy called Dave Mattox. And ever since then, Gary's made me all my drums. He's a lovely guy and he's very good at it.
And I saw a picture of you playing in Germany on a Sonar kit. I think it was
Yeah.
1988, but it was double bass. And you don't usually play double bass. Was that just a setup that you just
If
played?
it was double bass, then it was. They made me a white kit, which could be easily split into two kits. But no, I'm not a double kit player at all. I mean, I love Ginger Baker and I love the idea of it. But the thing about rock music, unless you're playing in a certain style, it just does not suit it really.
Exactly.
I also I have a damaged left leg. And my sciatic nerve doesn't really work, so I've always had trouble in actually getting my foot to follow my brain's signal. So
Wow.
I didn't know about that. How long have you had that injury?
well, that was when that happened when I was a teenager. I was all I did was play sports. I loved sports, and I grew very early, so I was big for my age, and so anything that involved strength, I was successful at to a degree. And I played cricket, which is this bizarre game that you know, Marcus, but maybe not Bill. And I was a fast bowler, which is the guy who runs up and hurls the ball as fast as possible. And looking back on it, and people have looked at me and examined me, I obviously slipped a disc when I was 16 or 17, but it wasn't recognized at the time. I didn't recognize it, and I just carried on. So, and then some years later, my left leg just sort of started feeling numb at the bottom of it, and it's a very normal thing. You can carry on fine, except if you're a drummer and you want to use your left leg, you really have to think hard about getting it to obey itself.
I remember hearing stories of you having pretty severe back pain.
That was all related. Yeah. I mean, I got back pain. Well, it seemed to be from drumming. Actually, I worked it out eventually that it was stress. I was always the leader in the band, sort of organization wise. I think I've written 2 songs that the band recorded. I wrote them with Katrina. I was the least good musician in the band, really, certainly in my mind. I was kind of like a player manager. And in fact, my then wife helped me on that a lot. It turned out we were quite a good sort of managerial pair. So when we were trying to make it, trying to get it money and get some success, it was very stressful, as you can imagine. And I was kind of on the sharp end of that.
My brother at one point told me that you were having all this back pain, and then you heard about a book, which I have here with me. It's called Healing Back Pain.
Oh, wow.
The Mind-Body Connection by John Sarno. He told me that you read this book. Your back pain went away because also there's a rather famous DJ who at the time had back pain as well. He read the book and he claims that his back pain went away. So you might be able to explain it better than I can, but the way I see it is that the pain was real. I mean, it was actual pain, but it was being caused by stress. It's the fight or flight response that happens.
Well, I actually did reread that book, but first of all, I read a book called Mind Over Back Pain by someone in New York. And I found it because somebody in the record company knew of the author. Anyway, I read it, and then I read Sano's book. And by that time, the band was definitely telling me that my back was at its worst when things were difficult. So that tallied with what both those books say, which is when you are stressed, your muscles, will contract. And if the muscles contract and you've got problems in the small of your back, which is what I had, as I didn't know at the time, but I had a damaged vertebrae joint, then extra muscular pressure would cause that pain. So it was real pain, but knowing that stress was the cause, I just sort of said, okay, that means I have control over it. Because the worst thing about for anybody who knows about any sort of body pain happening in your head, wherever it is, the feeling that you can't do anything about it is the most difficult thing to deal with. When I understood what I hoped was the right thing, it was a huge relief because I knew I could do something about it. And up to that point, I didn't think I could do anything about it. Anyway, so that was more or less the end of my back pain problems.
And when I would see videos of you playing, you had that left foot bouncing, that left leg bouncing all over the place, which was great because you're feeling the time, and I couldn't notice you had any back problems.
Well, yeah, I mean, it did, but I mean, I would have the embarrassing thing every now and then. I'll be in the studio and be listening back to a take, and the hi-hat, I would be pedaling the hi-hat, and it wouldn't be in time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd just forgotten about it. When I really, really, really thought about it, I could pretty much make it work. But it's still difficult for me now. I mean, I was trying to do the Steve Gadd shuffle, actually.
Right. I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I find that really, really difficult to do because you have to be so accurate.
Okay, so I want to talk about this massive hit that you guys had, Walking on Sunshine. It starts with a 4-bar drum intro. And the way my brother explained it to me was that song was being mixed at the power station, I think, in New York City.
Yeah.
Scott Litt was the producer, and Nile Rodgers was hanging out at the time, and he was hearing the song, and it was his idea to have the song start with a drum intro because it wasn't originally played like that. Is that correct?
Not exactly, no. He asked, who knew Niles, asked Niles to come in and he had an arrangement idea, but it didn't involve the drums. It was the brass. What happened was the track basically wasn't happening. And Scott turned to me and said, do you mind trying the drums again? And I thought, I better do that if he thinks it needs it. I didn't think this track was sounding that great anyway. So I went out and played for about 20 minutes. The track didn't have a click track, by the way. So I had nothing to play to except everybody else. But that's what worked. And then there still wasn't an intro. But what Scott did, as he had recorded the drums separately, he took the 4 bars that he liked the most and just put them at the front of the song. And that really, I think, is that one thing he did is one of the major reasons why it is a hit, because the DJs at the time loved the drum intro, and then Katrina does a big scream, ow! And that, so, the DJs could play with it. And that was a great idea, and it worked. And here we are 40 years later, and everybody still knows it.
So Vince was full of it when he said that Nile Rodgers had the idea to start.
Well, he was just confusing two things. It was, your brother. He gets confused sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, you've been the only drummer really since 1975 to play with the Waves and Katrina in the Waves. How are you able to stay in the band and be that only drummer for like close to 50 years?
A, I was bigger than the rest of them. And B, I was in charge anyway. not musically,
Oh,
but just
right.
organization wise.
Your wife Carmina actually got you guys signed to Capitol. Is that right? She was the manager.
Well, she and I were co-managing, and she was definitely PR front. I mean, she was good at talking people into things, and it was a good combination that worked for a long time. But unfortunately, what can happen, especially in this business, which is very stressful, if you're married and you're working together, then you never have a break. So eventually, that was the end of us. But we're still friends.
It's interesting what you said about stress and the back pain because I saw a Chicago documentary where they were talking about Danny Seraphim was managing the band pretty much at the same time he was trying to be a member of the band, and his drumming just kind of went south, and finally they said he couldn't find one anymore. So you know what? I'm sorry, Danny, you got to go. That was totally mismanaged on his point.
I can totally, relate to that. It's very difficult. I mean, I would find myself playing a gig, and in the middle of the gig, and I remember one specific time we were playing in Sweden, and it was a 4,000 or 5,000 seater theater, and it was full, and everybody was having a great time. And in the middle of the song, my brain went into, oh, crikey, this problem. It's weird. I totally sympathize with that. Your brain can mess with you any sort of way it wants.
Back to Walking on Sunshine, how quickly did the venue size change once Walking on Sunshine became a hit?
Well, you have to remember when it was 1985. MTV was at its peak, because you lived through it. MTV, if you were on MTV, if you were one of the 25 songs that was being rotated that week, pretty much every young person knew your song, and they knew what you looked like. And so I remember we started on a club tour, and then it became a big hit. And they took us off a club tour, and we were going around stadiums with Don Henley, supporting Don Henley. And we had to fly for a lot of the time, and we were recognized in the airport every time. Well, Katrina was, because she's on camera more than anybody else, but the rest was by association. The whole thing happened, I don't know, within 2 or 3 months. We were playing much bigger places. We never did a tour that lost money. It was always, we always made money, which was quite rare. We were incredibly lucky. I mean, it's completely the opposite now. You can't get anybody to pay attention or know who you are. I mean, in many ways now you have much more control over your creative whims and plans and everything. And any money you make, you keep most of it. Whereas back then, you didn't get paid well, considering the amount of money you're making everybody else. But swings and roundabouts. And I think we're extraordinarily lucky.
So at one point, you guys played with, let's see, you opened for Wham and the Pointer Sisters at MSG, Madison Square Garden. What was that like?
Chaka Khan was on that. And that was the person I sort of was in total awe of. And the Pointer Sisters were great. And they're lovely, lovely bunch. But Chaka Khan, to me, was one of my idols. And I remember riding back from a show with her. She was great. Heck of a singer. But I mean, George Michael was patently, obviously conflicted, but an absolute genius even then.
So was J.R. Robinson the drummer on stage with Chaka Khan?
Well, actually, I don't know. He could have been. I never thought of that. I was so transfixed with her. I wasn't thinking about the musicians. God, it could have been, I suppose, because he did play with her for a long time.
Now, you were saying earlier that there was no click track on Walking on Sunshine. Did that change as your career went later, that most things you recorded would be with the click?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just became the norm. it did change. I'm not a great player with click, but I can do it like anybody else can now. But I mean, it's not my favorite thing. But it's very useful um, when I do gigs and I'm not so sure of the material, playing with a bunch of people I don't know particularly well. Then it's always useful to know what the speed is, and I usually flip it off after the song starts.
Yeah, it's a safe way to get the tempo right. That's for sure.
Yeah, if you start right, then it's I had a song I'd just been because Vince and I. Well, Vince is now living in Portugal, and we're just putting a band together because there's a charity thing, dogs charity, which we want to help with. So we're putting a band together, and I always wanted to do Elvis Costello's "Pump It Up." So we're doing that, and it's unbelievable that track. It's almost like one or two of the Stones classics. It starts so slowly and then it speeds up, I should think 4 or 5 BPM, and you do not notice it. Absolutely, you do not. And, that's true of a lot of the Stones tracks. It's true of everybody's tracks. I mean, jazz track way back then, there's loads of jazz with sped up. And, yeah. But of course, it happened and it started the click track because of the digital technology, it made editing much easier.
Are you feeling that time in your body movements? Because you do move around a lot. Are you feeling the time there or in your chest, or how are you feeling the time?
Yeah, I do. My modus operandi is to get lost in the music and not worry about anything else. I've learned to do that now, and no, I've always am completely unconscious of the fact that I'm moving around or making a funny face or whatever. I didn't even know that. I never knew that I was a hard hitter and a loud drummer until enough people, told me. I just didn't know it. I didn't mean to be.
I wanted to ask about, as the 80s wore on, we got into some more, digital type recording and maybe sound replacing, triggering, even programming. How did you feel about that happening?
Okay, so I accepted that it was happening and there's nothing you could do about it, really. Of course, I had learned to play. By and large, I really started learning drums in 1970 when I was about 18. I'd had a drum kit up to then, but I was just busy playing sport. And I went to university. I was going to continue to play sport, but I brought my drum kit because it was a beaten up old drum kit and I thought I might sell it. And then it turned out that I was one of only 3 people who had a drum kit amongst 20,000 students at Cambridge in England. So I suddenly had a whole load of people knocking on my door saying, could you come and play drums? And I said, well, I don't even know I'm any good. And they said, but you got a drum kit. So that was good enough. So that's when I started learning properly, playing very regularly. And so the way I learned was the technology back then, which was if you went to a recording studio, you just play and you all play together. And when you went and played a gig somewhere, if it was a big room, you just had to hit it harder because no one's going to point a microphone in your direction in order to amplify the sound of the drums. So I might be sandwiched between 2 Marshall 50-watt amps, and 4x12 cabinets, and I just had to learn to hit hard. And
Like, did you play rim shots on the snare 2 and 4 most of the time?
certainly in those circumstances, yes.
Yeah.
because made it louder.
Any injuries from wrist or hand, elbow, arm from playing that loud?
No, I haven't had any injury like that. No, I don't know why not. I've always, I think maybe because I played a lot of sports when I was young. So, I was fit, and I had the habit of staying fit. And when we would go on tour, I would, go to the gym or go for a run or something. Because I was a very physical drummer, and I still am pretty physical. Under lights, we do an hour and a half show, and I would lose at least 3-4 pounds in just sweat.
Wow.
Oh.
That's amazing.
But I'm a fairly big guy, not as big as JR, who's he's about 6'5", isn't he?
You're at least 6 foot, aren't you?
Yeah, I was about 6 foot. I think I was just under 6'3" at my height, but now, one shrinks. I've lost a good couple of inches, that's for sure.
Did you ever take lessons? And if not, who would have been your biggest influences on your playing?
Okay, so tragically, and I really wanted to, I didn't take lessons because there weren't any drum teachers. At my school, there was not one drum teacher at any of my schools, and there was no drum teacher near where my parents lived. I knew of 2 drum teachers in London, but that was it, and they were very expensive.
Who are your biggest influences?
Well, my biggest influences, lots and lots of people. My hero, I absolutely loved Ringo and Charlie. My first favorite band was a band called The Shadows, who were an instrumental group, who backed a very famous singer at the time called Cliff Richard. And they had a fantastic drummer called Brian Bennett, who I still think has played one of the best drum solos ever on an album. He was fabulous, but I just loved everybody. I mean, I adored Louis Bellson and Buddy Rich and Philly Joe Jones and everybody. I just love drummers, my influence is probably Ringo and Charlie. I would love to have been either of them. I'd love to have had the skill that they had. What they share in common is the ability to play exactly the right thing. And they always just get the feel right. Somebody who used to be in the studio quite a lot with the Beatles told me one day, he wasn't a musician, he was an artist, but he was a friend of theirs, and he had made some sculptures of the 4 Beatles and became good friends. And he said, the one thing I noticed was that whenever they played a song, nobody talked about Ringo. And I asked about it. And they all said, well, it's because Ringo is always perfect. And that, I think, is the greatest compliment you can ever give to a drummer.
Yeah, Ian Pace once commented that every single Beatles song that he's ever heard has a great feel.
Yeah. Bonham was the same in his style. And there was Ringo. And I think Charlie was very similar to that. It's a very special knack. I did meet Greg Bissonnet.
Mm-hmm.
He told me about the first time that he played with Ringo. And Greg is, one of the monster drummers that can do anything. And he said, I was so nervous. And I said, why? He said, well, I didn't know if I was going to place the snare drum in the same time as, same place as Ringo. For him, Ringo was the master of where the snare drum went. And he didn't want to mess it up for him.
Yeah, that's awesome. I took lessons with Greg, and he's just the greatest.
Really?
Yeah, greatest human being
I only met him briefly once, and seemed a very, very nice guy, very modest.
Yeah, oh, for
He's an
sure. Yeah.
incredible drummer.
Yeah, I would compliment him and he would just say, "Oh no, come on, stop." All right, I got a question for you. When I was about 17, I went to a concert where Pat Travers' band was opening for Rush, and it left such an imprint on my mind of what was possible. Seeing Tommy Aldridge and then Neil Peart play was like, wow, blew my mind. Did you have a concert when you were younger that made you realize, "Oh, I want to do this"?
Oh, I think the first time I saw the Shadows and Brian Bennett was drumming, and I just thought, I have to do that. I'd love to do that. But those two drummers you're talking about they're inhuman, really.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
extraordinary. How you do that, I really don't know. I think Stuart Copeland's pretty inhuman as well, because not only is he the drummer in the Police, he was completely original. And I understand now why he was, because he was brought up in Beirut and the culture from there in the Middle East. And therefore, he saw beats and ideas in a different way.
I had a question about the song Spider Man. And I know it's a track that you're very proud of, drum wise. It's on the first Katrina and the Waves album when you guys were signed to Attic, the Canadian label. Kim's guitar effect, I don't know if that's a tremolo or vibrato.
Fender amp, and it has the tremolo setting on it. I don't think he even designed it that way, but I think when we did that take, it was sort of making the volume change at a certain speed, which I thought was the right for the track. And so I did my best to play it along with it. I didn't really think about my drumming too much. I just sort of played instinctively, particularly back then. And after it, I thought of it, and I thought to myself, why did you think, that was a good idea? But I really like it. But very few people have heard it because that album is not, didn't sell hugely.
Right. And Spider-Man, I don't think was ever released on, Capitol. But
Not on Capitol. No, it wasn't. No.
I was wondering if you played along to, so that reverb or that tremolo, whatever effect that is, that basically was your click track. Is that right?
It was, yeah. It was a very crude a very inaccurate form of click track, yes.
Several years ago, my brother asked me to recreate that drum part for he's put out a couple of solo albums.
And there's some very good stuff in it, yeah.
So he actually used the music from Spider-Man, but he had a female singer sing his version of the song, and he asked me to record the drums for that tune. And that is one of the most challenging songs I've ever played, because it's the constant 16th notes on the hi-hat during the verses, and then you go to the toms for the chorus, which is,
I would struggle to play it, yeah.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, because I did. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I've been trying to teach myself a technique so I can still play at the speed that I used to be able to, but it's really difficult. If I suddenly had to sit down without any practice and play that at that speed, I don't think I'll be able to do it.
I was going through the catalog of Katrina songs and I saw a sped up version of Walking on Sunshine. What are your thoughts on that version that's faster than the others?
Oh, I don't like that. I didn't like that version. I made the band make 3 different versions. We did that version, which is really, really fast. And I didn't like it at all, but I did think that it had some potential. And so we did another version where, and I think it was that second version, it wasn't very good, but it gave somebody else, gave a brass arranger, heard that track and said, could I do the brass arrangement? And so we said, yeah, of course. And so we did. We put brass on that, on the third version. And then that version again was changed in the mix, as we've heard. So really, that was the final single was version number 4. I never got that first version. It was a real sort of fast punk thing. And I just thought it lost the tune. But I mean, Walking on Sunshine, and this is very common amongst artists, you know, their most successful song or tracks are very rarely the biggest ones. And Walking on Sunshine is not my favorite of all. I mean, I've got lots that I liked more, but I do recognize that it's what I think of it as a great record. Because it is what it is. We couldn't have made it again. It just happened. And it's a great record of a good song. But, you know, I think the record is better than the song. If you just play the song and, you know, on an acoustic guitar and sing along, you wouldn't see something amazing in it. But we just happened to be part of what is now, I suppose it is a great record. I mean, I feel a bit cheesy actually saying that, but I have to admit that it's still around, and everybody, you know, the young kids on the street in Portugal, they know Walking on Sunshine.
That track makes you feel good. And I think
Yeah,
that's why it's got the longevity. It makes you feel good.
Yeah, that is exactly what it is. And again, I've been blessed by that song. We've never been involved with another song that's been as big as that at all. We had a few small sort of local hits, small in comparison to Walking on Sunshine, around the place. We had a few hits in Europe, and we had a big hit right at the end of our career when we won a weird thing which called the Eurovision Song Contest, and that was fun for a couple of months or whatever. But I mean, yeah, it's by far the biggest thing, and I'm very, very proud of it. You know, it's wonderful when someone says to you, you know, they love that song. It's great. The only thing I don't like is being on the dance floor and that comes on. I don't know how you dance to Walking on Sunshine. It's too fast.
That's funny. And you know, you were talking about the Eurovision Awards and Love Shine a Light. I didn't really know that song until I started really researching for this interview. And I love the lower pitch snare you put on that, and the dynamics you have in that track are really good. Do you remember what snare you used on that?
One of my Gary Noonan snares, a big sort of, I think it's 7-inch deep.
Very nice.
With a thick maple shell. Yeah, so it's a really nice drum.
So let's see, on the song, That's the Way. Is that you playing on that with maybe triggered toms and triggered snare?
I think all the drum sounds on that record are triggered. Yeah. Yeah. It has that very much that sort of 80s sound to it, I think.